I consider myself a writer from both North Carolina, where I was born, in a small town, really a farm just outside of a small town, and Oakland, California, where I've been living for the last 20 years. All of my stories, except for this most recent story, when the drum major died, are set in Oakland. A lot of people from Oakland are from the Deep South, so it makes it very easy for me to write about Oakland and include the roots of the protagonists and the supporting characters, since I'm also from North Carolina. And of course, as I said, my last novel, When the Drum Major Died, is actually set in North Carolina. I would say that my experience with my grandmother inspired me to not only become a writer, but to have a love for reading, which I think is the foundation for writing. My grandmother lived about 5 miles from my mother's home, and I spent a lot of my early youth before I even went to school there. And then, of course, I spent weekends and Sundays and summer holidays at my grandmother's. She had this huge, well, it was huge to me, bookcase, and it was full of books. And I used to just sit there and go through all the books and sit there and just read. Also, my grandmother would tell me a lot of stories. So it was my grandmother that inspired me to not only have a love of writing, but a love of books and reading. I began just writing in 1996, but it was not until I wrote my second novel, which is called The Road to Ibadan. It is not yet published, but I worked on that novel for about a year. And right after 9/11 occurred, and my husband told me that 9/11 had taken place, which is very similar to what goes on in my book, I then began to think, I'm writing something that maybe others want to read that has some relevance to current events or past events. And that's when I began to write in 2001, 2000, with the idea of becoming eventually published. I have to go back to my grandmother. Yes, my upbringing and my childhood, again, in the arms of my grandmother, both literally and figuratively, really encouraged me to have a love of reading, a love of books, and a love of writing. And as I said, I do believe that reading and loving books is the cornerstone for not only learning how to write, but improving with your writing. Both my grandmother and my mother were educated to become teachers. My grandmother never taught. She was a full-time wife and mother, but I think, as a lot of people said, she ran a school from her home. My mother was a teacher, and she loved to write speeches, and she also loved to teach English. I generally get some sense of what the title of my book is going to be at the time that I'm getting the idea for the book. Now, the complete title is usually it's usually worked out in a process that runs parallel to the revising of the book. For instance, I come up with an idea for a title when I'm writing the first draft. And then when I start revising it, and there may be several revisions, I then begin to work on revising the title, so that by the time I finish all the revisions, the full title as it's going to be is generally worked out. I write women's fiction, and I write women's fiction that is specifically focused on women making things right with their significant others, their children, their friends, through and by way of working out old issues, resolving past issues with their mothers. I write this genre for two reasons. One, I began writing when I was in my 30s. I had been married at least 10 years. I had 2 daughters. I now have 3. So it just seemed natural for me to write about women and who are married and have children. Secondly, I have 3 daughters. I'm also a psychotherapist. I've done a number of years of work in my own individual psychotherapy to work out issues with my mother. And secondly, or thirdly, as a psychotherapist, my main focus is working with women who want to resolve issues with their mothers. So it just fits right in with who I am, what I'm doing both professionally and personally, to do women's fiction that focuses on working out past issues with your mother. My most rewarding experience, I think, comes around every time I not only write the rough draft but then revise it several times. And it's usually about that third or fourth revision that I begin to see all the threads coming together. And let me just say that, in my opinion, or at least in my experience of writing, there is the plot process of the story that the protagonist or major character goes through. But then there's the process that I go through each time I work out a book and I revise it. So when I'm usually around that third or fourth, maybe even fifth revision, when everything is coming together and I begin to see, oh, this is what this book is about, not only for the reader, but for me and my whole writing process as a novelist, I get really excited. And then I think, I can't imagine myself doing anything else. I would not say that I have negative experiences as much as challenging experiences. For me, the challenge is always, how do you bring the threads together and work through that first revision of the middle of the book? Every book is divided into three parts: beginning, middle, and end. Your beginning is going to be the first quarter of the book. Your end is going to be the last quarter of the book. And the middle, where everything either comes together or falls apart, is going to be that second fourth and third fourth. So it's going to comprise about half your book. And that, for me, is the most challenging aspect of writing any book or story. How to write that middle and work through it and have faith that what I know will help me get through and make it into a story that is entertaining. I think the most rewarding experience in my publishing journey was when I self-published my second book. My first book was traditionally published by Ink and Paper Group. It was a collection of short stories that actually was my MFA thesis. And that was exciting, extremely exciting. It's always wonderful when someone believes in you enough to spend their money and time to publish your work and bring it to the public. But my most rewarding experience was when my husband read my novel, which is my second book, first novel though, The House, and fell in love with it and said, you have to publish this. That was just, words cannot express how I felt, because it gave me the energy to step forward and say, you know what, I can publish this work and I can put it out there. And it's been even more beautiful because that is the book that people love, and people keep asking me, when are you going to have a sequel to it? So publishing and bringing to the public The House, which is my second book, has been my most rewarding experience as a writer and a publisher. I think it's always difficult when you see these, how do I want to describe them? These reviews on Amazon that really aren't reviews, but they're just people's rants, in my opinion, because the book or the story has touched them in a way that they're not necessarily comfortable with. They don't give you, how can I say, constructive criticism as much as they talk about how this isn't plausible, and yet you and I and others know that it happens every day. But again, I think it strengthens me, because if you can read a negative non-review and still continue to write, I think it lets you know that you are on the path of living out your passion. So I would tell other authors to keep writing, have faith in what you're doing, and don't forget that the writing process is a continual process of learning. So don't be daunted by that. I have many authors that I love to read, but I think my most favorite author is Sunetra Gupta, and the book that she's written that I just love and have read it twice and will read it again, probably a fourth time as well, is A Sin of Color. She's not a very well-known author, but her work speaks to me, and it exemplifies what I think every author wants a book or their book to do, which is the very last words of Sunetra Gupta's book, A Sin of Color, echoes the beginning in a way that you just want to go back and start reading it all over again. I would invite everyone that's viewing this to visit my website, www.anjuellefloyd.com. That's www.anjuellefloyd.com. And please read some of my blogs. And if you're inspired, please sign up to receive my blog post at your email. And again, peace and blessings to all.